work that we do. But I think especially in following up to Jakob's presentation, it's interesting to look at some concrete examples about how this policy is being manifested in two cities where we've done a lot of work. Just to point out this picture as well, this is in Paris. And as you can see, sometimes policy implementation is a little bit rough if you take it too literal, right? So rather than looking at Paris or other EU cities, I'm going to be focusing on New York and Mexico City, which you may have heard a little bit about already from Gil and from Yan. But basically, just to give you a little bit of a background about New York City, there's 5 boroughs, and we were coming from little Copenhagen here, which is the medieval core of Copenhagen, can fit 23 times just on the southern tip of Manhattan. So New York City is quite large in comparison to Copenhagen. So the idea of being able to take best precedent and translate it to another context is something that we work a lot with. And one thing to overcome is, of course, scale. So basically the policy that we were charged, that we were given, was this Plan YC document. So this is a really visionary, innovative document that the City of New York made in 2006 to basically try to recapture the city's glory as the leading city in the U.S. in terms of sustainability. So the Greener Greater New York concept idea was a policy to work with growth, infrastructure, and the environment to plan for the city over the next 30 years. But really what they said to us when we were given the project was, well, we have this vision, so now we need to find out what we can do with it. They suggested that what we begin with is a series of pilot projects in each borough to make sure that these implementations are spread out evenly throughout the city. So we looked at up in the Bronx there at Fordham Road, in Queens, Brooklyn, and then of course Broadway on Manhattan, which is a little bit more of the flagship, you might say. So the idea is to move quickly. When we were hired in 2007, we already wanted to be able to create some temporary interventions to show what Plan YC meant. When it was released, people were very excited about Plan YC, but New Yorkers want action. So we needed to make a plan where already last summer, a few temporary interventions could be made that then became pilot projects, which were implemented this summer, that will hopefully become long-term strategies. All the way on down to 2030 there for a true greener, greater New York. So when looking at this relatively logical progression from policy to project, we realized that, of course, if you want to create a healthy, vibrant, safe, attractive, sustainable city, this really calls for a change of mindset. And that change of mindset is difficult. It's something that needs to filter through all layers of city government, all layers of citizenship, all layers of the city. And luckily, we could see that this vision was very much embraced by the mayor. So you see Mayor Bloomberg with some star power behind him, there, Lance Johnson, talking about how these pilot projects could be implemented. Basically, when we began working in New York City, they had a big countdown clock in the mayor's office, stating that he had 565 days until a new mayor would come in. So there was an extreme sense of urgency from his side. Everyone in his office knew that one day without something being put on the ground was one day taken away from the mayor's legacy. He also had opportunities to really surround himself with some very exciting people. The Commissioner of Transport, they're pictured behind the mayor, Jeanette Sadat Khan, basically had a very successful career in the public and private sector and agreed to take this job if she could try to implement congestion charging. So Bloomberg said, yes, job's yours, we'll give it a shot. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. The Commissioner of Health, that was also part of the administration, said, I'll take this job if we can put in a smoking ban. So that was successful, and since then, the Commissioner of Health has now gone on to be the director of the OECD in Obama's administration. So this legacy was not only for the mayor, but also for everyone in his cabinet. And it really meant that people were serious about getting things right as quickly as possible. So one of the first things that we did is taking a page from Bogota that maybe Gil has shown you already, is this concept of summer streets. So closed Park Avenue from Central Park all the way down to Brooklyn Bridge, and closed it for traffic, but opened it for all types of other activity. So this really gave New Yorkers a chance to experience a part of the city that they knew quite well in a completely different way. So it was a huge success. New Yorkers are fantastically active, and if you give them an inch, they really do take a mile. So before you knew it, more and more activities than we could ever dream of were spilling out until Park Avenue these 3 Sundays in the summer of 2008. That was only built upon and also had a very successful implementation this past summer as well. The other big thing that we wanted to do quickly was to take a look at Broadway. As I mentioned, we were looking at 4 different pilot projects, but everyone knew that Broadway was the flagship. It has the myth of one of the most fantastic streets in the world. Unfortunately, the reality is much different than the myth. I'm not sure how many of you have been to Broadway, but it's in many cases very unspectacular. Traffic congested, busy, hectic, just like every other street in Manhattan. So to try to recapture some of that glory, we proposed a series of interventions at each point where Broadway crosses the grid. So you have pretty well-known public spaces at Columbus Circle, at Times Square, Madison Square Park, Union Square, etc., that had all been in the public's imagination, but when you get there, weren't quite living up to any type of vision for a greener, greater New York. So very quickly, in a matter of basically overnight, space was reclaimed at Madison Square last summer. And it was a sort of quick and dirty type of installation where literally overnight, crews went in, put down a different type of surface, and took some space back for public space. To be honest, we were quite critical of this project. We thought that it didn't encapsulate a lot of the strategies that we had hoped to implement. Still seemed kind of traffic dominated. It didn't quite get there 100%. But the Department of Transportation was more concerned at that point at just getting it done. And that's, you know, an ideological conversation that we can have. But it's proven that it's basically led to a little bit better implementation now this past summer at Times Square. So Times Square is this funny place. I'm not sure if you've been there, but there's no square there. Or at least there wasn't a square. You know, you have people dodging vehicles, climbing over barriers, and we actually went in and analyzed the square and found out that of Times Square, only 11% of the space is actually possible for people to occupy. 89% of it is for road space. So what this project was about was trying to reclaim a square, essentially, in this center of the universe, as New Yorkers like to call Times Square. So taking away Broadway from vehicular traffic and basically reclaiming it for public space. And lo and behold, if you've been to Times Square since May of this year, then there's actually a square there, and it's incredible what's happening. There's all sorts of different activities taking place. More people than you could ever imagine actually spending time in this square. I think Jan mentioned as well that in Copenhagen we've seen that as more and more space is given over to people, more and more people spend time there. It's true at a gigantic scale in Times Square. And we have all of a sudden a whole lot of different user groups that are spending time in the center of the universe. People with disabilities, small children, all coming to Times Square. A different way to actually appreciate the city. People hadn't viewed all of these buildings, all of these interesting sites from this perspective ever before, and are now able to do so. And it's just this fantastic people zoo of sorts. I mean, there's people doing all kinds of things alone, but still together, and interacting.